Alright guys, let's talk about it. What is the most expensive Yu-Gi-Oh deck that is also going to be what I would consider the best? Because while we could take a look at certain cards that have actually sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and on top of that there are PSA graded cards that can go for quite a bit of money, I wanted to know what was the most expensive Yu-Gi-Oh deck that could actually play, because I could just go see some sort of completed listings for all of the cards that have actually sold, put them together in a deck, make the trashiest Yu-Gi-Oh deck, throw in a bunch of ghost rares and a bunch of misprints. This deck wouldn't even be good. But I also wanted to kind of add another set of rules to this, is I'm going to be factoring in at the time how good were these Yu-Gi-Oh cards. And the reason why is because certain times certain things were really expensive and they were good, right? And then eventually later they get reprinted. Like this card's $3 now, but this card was like hundreds or even $1,000 at some point. This even was relevant with like the SJC Cyber Sign, where certain cards, they would go up in price through time because they are so rare. And while they're not either playable or let's say that they're just not good, I was wondering what was the most expensive Yu-Gi-Oh deck, and I was searching out over on Reddit, looking at different Pojo forums, and a lot of people came up to the conclusion that the most expensive Yu-Gi-Oh deck is Teledad, the Teleport Dark Arm Dragon, and that is because at the time, it was pretty much one of the best Yu-Gi-Oh decks of all time when it came out. And on top of that, maybe there wasn't that many other things that you can play. Also factoring when it came out, a lot of people would just mention Teledad. And while I could just instantly go ahead and give you guys the deck list, I kind of wanted to take a trip down memory lane here because I thought that was really cool as I was doing research to kind of figuring out the prices of certain decks. And there is a little bit of leniency because with certain decks that require cards that are, let's say, $1,000, sometimes people sell these for a lot cheaper. They're just kind of traded, so it's really hard to gauge how much, especially when they're only prize cards, what they're actually worth. Well, it's really easy to see hundreds of listings on certain things. There's not that many listings of, again, prize cards, and that is one thing that you have to factor in kind of when you're looking at the most expensive Yu-Gi-Oh decks. For me, off the top of my head, I'm thinking like Dino Rabbit as well as the Dragon Rulers. Those were some of the most expensive Yu-Gi-Oh decks, right? And while looking at a bunch of different things, sure, those are some really expensive Yu-Gi-Oh decks, but when did those decks come out? Because if we're looking at, the way inflation has gone with certain cards, as well as just money in general, right? Because like $100 now is not the same as $100, back in 2008, right? So that is a huge thing. And also certain card prices over the course of time have actually diminished. Some have actually gone up in price, and that is because they didn't have its reprint or people want the original copy. So this listing over here, just as a heads up, this is one of the posts that I really liked from Infinite Player via someone named Zach over here. It's a really good post. However, some of these cards that they're mentioning, again, at the time, certain cards like Maxi, they were like $80 to $100, whereas now, even though Maxi is banned, it's still a pretty expensive card. So this video, it's really hard to put an objective price tag on something, but I would say over $1,000 with Teledad back in the day was one of the most expensive Yu-Gi-Oh decks. But what else was expensive that is actually even more expensive than what I'm putting at kind of my number one list, because I wanted this video to be as objectively as possible, but also factoring in inflation and well as kind of how the way that certain prize cards do sell for, because I've had prize cards in my hand for a while, and the prices on prize cards, again, it can go from anywhere from like, let's say $300 to $1,000. And that's a huge gap, especially when you're considering like maybe people were playing 2 copies of certain cards, right? But I also wanted to factor in what was actually winning, because you could throw in, again, double copies of Blood Memphis. You can throw in like the Dark Lords. You can throw in a lot of things into a deck and not even have it see play, like especially with Blood Memphis in the extra deck, which was several $100s. These weren't like winning consistently. There's one player that did top with Blood Memphis that I'm aware of, and I covered it. But I want to go ahead and take a trip down Yu-Gi-Oh lane, looking at some of the prices of cards. Keep in mind, this market price thing isn't always going to be accurate because these prices fluctuate, and it's kind of using the newer numbers. And some of these people were playing certain cards, like for example, this Jeff Jones deck over here was playing a Ulti Black Rose, and that card is not cheap. Now, is there a difference between an Ulti Black Rose and a common Black Rose, or even just an Ultra Black Rose? At the time, you can get this card out of a tin too. Is that going to make a difference? Obviously not. Like, there's no like pay to win for the rarity in a card, although there's actually pay to lose with ghost rares, which is a subject that we covered, where if you hold a ghost rare in your hand, it can actually be pay to lose, because shines basically differently, and people can actually see the reflection. It's kind of a weird thing in Yu-Gi-Oh, but we're really here to talk about the most expensive Yu-Gi-Oh decks. So Mermos was easily a several $100 deck. Again, right here, keep in mind these numbers are super fluctuating because it shows 400 here, but at the time, Megalo was several hundred for a playset. I mean, it was not uncommon to see Megalo go from anywhere from $80 to $100 when this card did see some play. Because like I said, while making this video, I kind of want to take a trip down memory lane, but I know some people just want to know, yo, what's the most expensive deck? It's kind of subjective. That's why I want to say, if you just want the answer, it's kind of Teledat. I say kind of because Dino Rabbit was incredibly expensive, which we'll go over in a second here. So yeah, Megalo was kind of just basically the most expensive cards. You also happen to have, you know, there's obviously Ulti Dragoons now, and there's other things that, you know, have, you know, higher rarities, but for the most part, this was a pretty expensive extra deck considering there's Big Eye. Remember when Dragon Rulers would play multiple copies of this, which could be several $100s just for the 3 Big Eyes. You could spend $300, and then on top of that you need Draco Sack, which was like over $100 per piece, and then again you have Dragon Rulers, which is like, you know, up there as well in terms of price. But yeah, I remember this deck specifically. This is like their list on Infinite TCG Player, but again, these were actually winning. This is the big difference here, and I wanted to kind of show off the expensive decks, but that were also considered the best decks because they actually won. Hopefully this kind of makes sense, because there was people that would play multiple copies of Minerva, but they might not have actually won. So therefore the deck list, that's where, again, this video kind of becomes subjective in a sense. But this was one of the most expensive decks because right now we're talking about like the Dino Rabbit. Now, how much does it show up? It shows up as 500, but remember, Tour Guide at the time was an easy 125 to 150 when it was hot. The rabbits themselves were $100 a piece. Like, just with 3 rabbits, that's already $300. You take a playset of Tour Guides for 150 each, that's $450, that's $750 just for those 3 cards. Well, like three copies of each, just for a playset of each, and there's no reason why you wouldn't want to play triple, right? So you would have this, and that was already almost at you know, $1,000. You factor in adding in the generic extra deck, Dolkalagi is $20-30 a piece. Yeah, you're looking at almost towards $1,000. And this was actually also running triple copies of Max C, which again, remember, Max C was going from anywhere from $30 to $100 at some points in Yu-Gi-Oh! Again, prices fluctuate, but at this time you could play a lot of other things. There was also Agents, there was actually Dark World that actually was a pretty popular deck. And, you know, there was a few other decks that could be played, and we'll go over the reasons why the number one is going to be the number one here. But yeah, you could play a couple different decks. This was by Joji Orlando. This is at YCS Atlanta 2012. Now, going into other expensive decks is the Dragon Link, the Thunder Dragon Link. And why was this expensive? Well, all the danger cards, before they had their reprints, they actually added up to quite a bit as well. And then the most expensive card is the Chaos Emperor, the Dragon of Armageddon, which again would be several hundred to $1,000. Again, it's really hard to kind of price this, and most of the stuff is actually banned now, so you can see it. Why is this one higher up on the list? Well, again, factor in the time of some of these. I mean, just with that one card alone, the Chaos Emperor, Dragon of Armageddon, I mean, if you're counting the high value of the card, that's like $1,000. That's instantly just like right up there, and then the rest of the stuff, it slowly adds up, but that's just what makes it so dang expensive. Plus, you would have all of the good, like, Nightmare cards, and again, all of these small cards are $5-10. They do definitely add up, especially when we get into, like, playsets of, you know, 3 cards that are, you know, $100 for the playset, and you need multiple, which is on our number 1 list, but yeah, Thunder Dragon League in 2019 was quite strong. And on top of that, we also have another deck that had a very expensive extra deck card, which was Minerva over here. So this card, at the time, this was several $100s. You can see there's not even any listed right here. There's no current listings for this card. But I mean, you can get the card for, I don't know, like $1 now. But that's the reprint. The original one was easily, like, this card was $300 at the lowest. There's certain rarities, right? And again, this would have to be kind of factored in at the time. You know, as time goes on with a lot of these, like even Dark End Dragon, when people are running that, as more copies come out, the prices do go down. So Minerva was a very expensive card, and some people played multiple copies of that card over here. But you can see this deck over here by Johnny Nguyen over here. This was in a regional, so it did actually top. This was in 2016. And how many copies of that card did they play? 3. absolutely insane. So again, several hundred to even towards like $1,000 was what I remember. I don't know if I saw any for 1,500, but again, with prize cards, this is the problem with like these listings. Again, if you go to like the most expensive Yu-Gi-Oh decks of all time, and we included like the BLS that supposedly sold for $1 million, again, it's a little bit fuzzy here, so take it with a grain of salt. Next up over here, I just wanted to briefly mention Gladiator Beast. At the time, Herc didn't get reprinted for straight up like a year. That was this card right here. That was a really good Gladiator Beast card over here that got reprinted in, like, I believe this was Duelist Genesis here. But this didn't get reprinted for a really long time. And Glads was a very, very powerful deck, considering you also needed to get ultra rare copies of Test Tiger. Very, very iconic Yu-Gi-Oh deck that people still like to play once in a while. See someone play Glads. It was a very iconic Yu-Gi-Oh deck, as I think it's one of the best Yu-Gi-Oh decks to learn. I obviously also played Crush Card, but what deck didn't if it could play? It's so weird that like you look at this deck and be like, what the heck do you Crush Card? Well, there was also this card called DD Crow that a lot of people still play to this day because it's a good card. But yeah, all of this stuff, I mean, just like with any Yu-Gi-Oh deck, a bunch of stuff adds up, but it's because we didn't have a reprint for a really long time. And also, I remember Solemn Judgment for a long time was 20 bucks, and you know, a playset that's already 60 bucks. Everything just kind of adds up over the course of time. But the thing, I mean, it shows at 600. It was, I think someone mentioned it was like 800-ish at the time. Again, look at the copy of Heraclinos. This is basically the same level of Teledad, but there's a lot of cards in Teledad that are basically $100 for a set, and there's so many in here, which is why at number 1 over here, and again, the rest of the stuff doesn't really matter too much in terms of its order because of the date that it was in, except for this one. This one was in 2008. This one over here was one of the most powerful Yu-Gi-Oh decks of all time. This is Teledad, and this is the first place one from SJC Sanfram in 2009. I know it says 300 here, and you're like, well, why is this one at number 1? Everyone, for the most part that I could find through my research, is basically saying Teledad was the most expensive. Again, if we look at it at the time, this was well over $1,000, but remember, this is 2009. Comparing 2009 to, let's say, 2012, or even going to 2024, which, like, right now, Snake Eyes is a pretty expensive deck as well. You're looking at a few $100s just for, like, certain cards in Snake Eyes. You're looking at, like, $100 per card, and that all starts to add up when you add all, like, the $10, $20, $30 cards, which is normal for Yu-Gi-Oh! But look at the stuff in Teledad, and tell me this is not absolutely crazy. So first off, I believe at the time Shroudus was like a specific jump card. It was like 30 bucks. I remember Malicious was a consistent $30+ card, so a playset of that was basically 100 right there. You also happen to have Plug Spreader, which was the easy $30 to $40 card at the time. And then you had 3 copies of Allure. You had 3 copies of D-Draw, 3 E-Tel. I mean, these are like $30 a piece. Again, at the time, there's like $100 for a set, $100 for a set. And then you also factor in that it would run Crush Card Virus as well, which was really expensive. And then you had like basically the God tier extra deck, because at the time, the way Yu-Gi-Oh was level 8 synchros were like the boss monster of the game. You make the Oppression Stardust, you were good to go. That was like a good thing. And then you factor in the guy playing triple YuGiOh Guardian, which, at least where I was living, this is back when Toys R Us actually existed. Toys R Us, for no reason, always had their prices way higher than anyone else. And like that was the only place you get the YuGiOh tin. The YuGiOh tin over there wasn't a $20 tin, which it was supposed to be. It was always $30, if you guys remember. And you know, Toys R Us not even in business anymore because they were inflating the prices back in the day. And YuGiOh Guardian was one of the most powerful boss monsters at the time, and well, right now it's absolute trash, and it's like 10 cents, right? But you know, at the time, that's another over $100. I mean, YuGiOh, even though it was in a tin, was a consistent like $25 card because it was just that good. But again, even before we would have it at easy access to YuGiOh, I mean, that was a very expensive card. Playing 3 copies of YuGiOh. And on top of that, again, all these cards start to add up when you go for the Mallies, the D-Draws, and on top of that, Dark Arm Dragon, which is, of course, it's the Teledad deck. This card was one of the more expensive Yu-Gi-Oh cards, being very consistent, because there's going to be a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh cards throughout the history of time that will be like $100 cards. But I remember this one, as far as like I remember in Yu-Gi-Oh, with the exception of like YCS prize cards, because those are kind of exceptions, this was one of the most sought after cards, and it would hold at over $100. People would not budge with Dark Arm Dragon. Like sometimes you can get good deals for like, you know, even Spellbook of Judgment when it was like $100 pretty consistently. You could still get it for like 70s, but like people would not budge on the Dark Arm. If you played Yu-Gi-Oh back in the day, you know how hard this card was to get, on top of people like actually trading it. And the thing that I also kind of want to factor in, it was a little bit harder to tell the prices of cards, because nowadays you go up to someone, you ask, you know, you want to trade that card. Back in the day, you could just be like, trade this card for this card. Okay, okay, cool. Nowadays, trade this card for this card, it's like, hold on, I gotta bust out my phone, I gotta check on the app, I gotta check out what's the lowest. Oh, hold on, TCG Player's not accurate, Troll and Toad's not accurate, eBay's not accurate, I gotta go to my website, right? And then they'll be like, well, that's not even a completed listing, and you just mess around with too much time in terms of like trading nowadays. Whereas back in the day, what I found most interesting is, like, even though a lot of people wouldn't use like the Beckett books, remember those back in the day when before we had smartphones and the internet that we would usually use when we would go to like locals, right? We would just have to memorize all these cards, or we would have this little book that would tell us the price. And that book was always outdated, because by the time you actually read the book, it was already out of fashion, because they would already have like the new copy ready to go, because obviously you have to distribute it, they have to print it, has to get to the stores, you got to buy it, and then by the time again a new set comes out, certain things can go up and down in price, and it's really hard to kind of gauge on the prices of Yu-Gi-Oh cards. But hopefully this video was kind of informative, and I know, like I said, I had the mindset of making this video objective, but if I was to be super objective, we would be throwing in these cards. So I wanted the video to be not only the best cards, but also the best cards that would actually be in a tournament competitive winning deck, and this was a really great post by Zach at Infinite TCG Player, so shout outs to him for that awesome post and the awesome trip down memory lane while just like remembering again like Dino Rabbit and like Dragon Rulers. It was really fun. But if you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like on it, and hopefully you guys learned something new. Sub if you're new here and want to learn about more Yu-Gi-Oh history, as I really enjoy these kind of subject videos as an OG Yu-Gi-Oh player. But anyways, take care guys, peace out.